Okay, guys, welcome back to part two. So again, we were talking about unlearning knowledge, which again, I talked about sounds sort of strange that we're talking about such a thing. But I think it's important to know that knowledge is critical for an organization, and knowledge is going to change, whatever that knowledge format might be, but knowledge is going to change. And as a result, it's going to become important for an organization to be able to adapt and implement new strategies, new knowledge management systems as a means to be efficient and effective. And to basically get away from that old saying, we've always done it this way, all right? And so that's sort of where we're going here. Let me just highlight again some of the things that we already talked about. Again, the definition of what is unlearning. It is a conscious and deliberate process of reflecting upon and being prepared to give up existing knowledge, values, or practices. So we're going to give them up, and we're going to encourage the employees to unlearn that particular process and learn a new process that's going to be more beneficial to the organization. So what is this all about? Again, it's the ability to unlearn and give up existing knowledge. It's going to be key to change, and allows an organization to be adaptable, and that's going to be critical. Organizations today, whether you're a multi-billion-dollar company or a law enforcement agency, you need to be able to be adaptable to change, both in terms of internal and external. And so that's what this section is going to be about. So, ability to unlearn something, and I have an example here, for example, of a new records management system. And again, a lot of times organizations may not like change, and we'll talk about some of the barriers to an effective communications to that change. But it's important that we understand that change can be a very emotional process for some. Some don't like change because they lose the benefit that they've learned. In other words, some people talk about power. We all know that one person, for example, in police records that knows everything. And we always go to that person because their knowledge, they have a lot of tacit knowledge about stuff. But if you implement a new records management system, they lose that. So power can also be lost. So implementing new strategies, technologies, ultimately is going to be for the benefit of the organization, but it's having people unlearn and give up existing knowledge that they have. So the book talks about different ways of forgetting knowledge. So if we're going to ask our employees that we're going to move on, we're going to be starting a new, let's say, records management system, but we as an organization need to understand how knowledge is acquired and how employees forget knowledge. And there are different ways that obviously employees do that. And this is covered in figure 8.1 of our textbook. But two different ways of forgetting knowledge. One is accidental, the other is intentional. So for example, in terms of memory loss, is knowledge is used infrequently. So there are certain tasks that we perform that we may not do frequently enough, and as a result, we forget how to do them. For example, there's an array of things. If you, for example, want to ask me for an incomplete, in other words, something comes up and you need to request an incomplete for this course. I have to go back and read what the rules are for incomplete, because I don't use incompletes very often. I think my whole 5 years I've been at Cal Baptist, I've used it one time. So I don't have that information at my fingertips because it's not something I use every single day. All right. So Memory loss. It can be accidental. Again, knowledge is used infrequently. So think of those things that you do infrequently at work. That sometimes you may have to go back and refresh your memory to remember how to do something. Maybe it's failure to capture. Okay, knowledge, for example, needs to be codified. So our rules and regulations, for example, I'll give you an example. We have a policy. We now have a policy that a canine officer can purchase his canine if the canine is, for example, ready to be retired. In other words, is no longer fit for service. And that was basically tacit knowledge within the organization. There was nothing explicit. It was tacit to those who dealt with canines. Until one time when somebody inquired as to the process and nobody knew where to go to get the information for the process, and things dragged out for a while. The reasons are neither here nor there, but after this incident, we codified, we made this knowledge explicit. So if you don't capture it, the knowledge is there and it's in tacit form, and you don't make that knowledge available to others, it's going to be lost. People aren't going to know how to do something, or the persons who knew how to do it are gone. They've retired or something to that effect. So failure to capture. The other modes of forgetting are intentional. And intentional is where something is done on purpose. Unlearning here, unlearning done on purpose. Maybe you just don't want to do it, or it's not a priority to you as an individual. The other way that we do forgetting is avoid bad habits, ideas of rules, and regulations. I'm sorry. So unlearning is done on purpose, and avoid bad habits is idea of rules and regulations, where a person is aware of the rules, but for whatever reason is not going to do it. Forgets to do it, whether that forgetful is something serious or not depends. So there was a while back when I was chief, and I decided that I was going to issue everyone tasers, and one of the directives was that, anytime you're working in uniform, whatever the assignment is, you shall wear your taser. In other words, it's part of your utility belt. A couple of people didn't like that, because they thought maybe they didn't have any more room, but for whatever reason, they decided that, they would just leave it in the car, and if they needed it, I suppose they thought they could run back to their car and get it. But the whole idea is that it was, it was intentional in the sense that they knew the rules and regulation was there, but they didn't want to follow it anyhow. So these are the modes of forgetting, all right? And so as an organization, we need to figure out the modes of forgetting, because as we develop, and as we'll learn here in a little bit, as we develop new means of knowledge, we're going to implement new records management system or things like that. We need to understand the reason why people may or may not be grasping this new type of knowledge and how to apply it. So we can look at it as either accidental or intentional. And those are the things within the organization that we need to understand as we begin to implement some of these changes within our knowledge management system, for example. Now, there are a couple of barriers to unlearning. Number one is the individual level. So there is a certain negative emotion involved in unlearning people and unlearning. In other words, people don't like change, and we've talked about that already. People get uneasy about change, especially if it's a significant type of change. And if you're switching to a records management system, it's a whole new ball of wax, so to speak. People are going to get uneasy about that, right? Shortly after I became chief, we moved into a new building, and then we were in the process of implementing a new records management system, CAD system, and then we were moving things into the radio cars so officers would be able to submit reports via their radio cars and not have to come to the station and drop things off and that type of stuff. a lot of issues and a lot of emotions going on at the time because we just moved into the new police building and now I'm throwing this at them. The idea is that implementing change, especially that type of change, can have an emotional effect on people in the whole idea of unlearning. Okay, why are we doing this? I like the old way. There's nothing wrong with the old way. It worked just fine. Things such as that. All right. The other thing that comes into play, and I mentioned previously, was this whole idea of loss of power. In other words, a person may have acquired a whole lot of tacit knowledge about a records management system. They knew how to get everything that you needed. And they were very, very familiar with the process. And now we're imposing a new type of system, and they're losing that power. So employees may end up losing some level of power, and that's one of the side effects. That's one of the barriers to unlearning. And as a result, you may have people try to undermine the project. The book talks about defensive routines. It says people may actively try and resist unlearning through carrying out what has been called defensive routines. You could call it defensive routines or maybe some level of, I don't like to use the word sabotage, but employee not believing that the system is going to be as efficient as the old one, and they begin to engage in these type of defensive routines. So this whole idea of loss of power, defensive routines, they no longer have that tacit knowledge that they had before, and so like everybody else, we're starting from square one. All right, so these are barriers to unlearning, and as an organization and an organizational leader, you need to understand that as you implement new changes in an organization in terms of a knowledge management system, there's going to be barriers to unlearning. In other words, you need to have people unlearn the old way and learn the new way, and so this is going to be part of your challenge. Barriers to unlearning from the organizational level. We talk about the role of institutionalization. The textbook does, but I want to spend a little bit of time talking about the distortion in organizational communication, and that's on page 130. And this is basically the focus of our discussion board for this week. And basically what they're talking about in terms of distorted forms of communication, let me switch slides here, is a handful of things. Number one, it says a failure to report any failures, often done in the hope or expectation that any problems will disappear over time. So, as an organization, if you don't report failures, you don't want to come across as one that realized that we did make a mistake when in fact you did not. You're gonna always have little glitches here and there, but that's one thing you don't want to do. If things don't produce the results as promised, and there's going to be issues with that regardless of what happens. I teach at another college, and we went from Blackboard to Brightspace, and I thought that, I was thinking to myself, wow, I'm very comfortable in Blackboard, now I'm going to this new platform, and there's some things that I like in Blackboard that weren't in Brightspace. Eventually, the university caught up, and it's now on equal keel, I think, with Blackboard. But the thing is that sometimes programs or management systems don't produce as initially promised. So you just need to understand that that's going to be an issue at first because there are going to be glitches and things like that. Don't minimize failures. In other words, some organizations are minimizing failures. Failures are important to recognize that we need to do some tweaking along the line to get things running back as smoothly as we can. Don't exaggerate small victories. Say stuff like, see, we told you so. It does work. Smaller things, but when we look at the bigger picture, we need to understand is this management system doing what we wanted it to do in the big picture. And then the issue of employee failure. Don't blame employees in the sense that, well, they don't want to learn. They're purposely not participating, whatever the case may be. But you can read about this on page 130. What can organizations do? Think about how organizations, if possible, can minimize this distortion of the communication barrier. What can an organization do to make changes easier for employees so that they can unlearn a lot quicker, right? I've run out of time. I do apologize, but have a good week, and I'll talk to you later.